yesterday.
Okay, we are recording. So good morning to those watching or evening or whenever it is that you're listening to this. You can't sleep at night. But you can watch this and that'll put you to sleep. Um, we are continuing our series, Pink is the New Green. I like that title. I found it in one of my articles, so I just decided to use it. Green is the new pink. I don't know which one. I lose track. Anyway, the point is that we're talking about the ethics of the supply chain. When we purchase items, we are concerned that in any of our activities, even as something as mundane as buying a sweater, we should be concerned that there are larger ethical issues involved. And we saw last time, and we'll just review, this has come up actually twice in the New York Times in the last few weeks. We'll take a look at that. We'll take a look at a teshuvah written by a rabbi in the Middle East some time ago, but also is that question of the supply chain. You know, the supply chain, it's kind of a vague issue, although I understand it's been getting a lot of publicity lately, as to where things are made and how that may be changing. We're not concerned with tariffs. We're concerned with the ethical issues in each part of the supply chain. Okay, so let me begin. I'm just going to quickly review some of the materials that we have looked at before. Okay, well, one of the things that we started with, can everybody see the text? Is it large enough? Okay, we all got it. Good. Was this question of how can we be sure my clothes aren't made in a sweatshop? And while this did appear not that long ago, here, July, it seemed to be dealing more with kind of high-end things. And her point was that we assume that if we buy high-end fashion, i.e., made in Italy, that it would be produced not in quote sweatshops, but people would be paid fairly and that the materials would be produced fairly. But she points out, and we looked at that it cannot be assumed. Even luxury, the supply chains are more far-flung and complicated. And there are a lot of problems. I didn't think she gave a very satisfactory answer. The safest approach for those looking about how to buy their clothes, think small. Well, how much stuff, how many pieces of clothing that you buy are made in the United States? Very few, right? Yes, they should try to do that, but yes, they may be more expensive, but it may be worth it. But I didn't think that was a tremendously helpful answer. So that question also was raised recently in in an article, and this one just appeared and just actually adds something. So it's a good introduction as well to what we're doing. I just need to change something right here. Oh, just my, just something went weird there. Okay. All right. I'm concerned about sweatshops. Should I change what I buy? How to balance concern for human rights. Now here he's adding another ethical question, which we haven't looked at, but which we will look at, but just going to raise it right now. With the concern for those who depend on jobs in overseas factories. So now the ethical issue is not just going to be how they are working, but are they working at all? And nice illustration. This is the Kwame Anthony Appiah. We've seen him before. He is an ethicist. He teaches at NYU, and he's the ethicist. Some of you may see his column on the Times on a Sunday in the magazine question section. Okay, so the question is simple. It was published just September 27th, so it was updated 3 weeks ago. So this is oops, fix that. I've been thinking a lot lately about aligning my values with my purchasing decisions. We did see some sources that first time said, yeah, you should be doing that. I mean, if you're an ethical person, your ethics don't stop when you walk into the mall, particularly when it comes to clothing. I'm aware that concerns have been raised about human rights conditions in some manufacturing facilities in developing countries and in China. As a matter of fact, I'm sure you're aware that a lot of clothing manufacturing has been moving out of China and into places like Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Indonesia. If you check your labels, you'll see that has been happening. The quest for cheaper labor, and well, who can figure out what's going on with tariffs? But that is what is happening. My inclination is not to purchase from companies that appear to be unconcerned about the working conditions in their overseas factory. I also realize, now here's the second ethical question. Many people, often in poor conditions, depend on these jobs to support themselves and their families. Now we're adding not just is the factory paying decent wages and not demanding fees for getting the job, required overtime, things of that nature. But what about they depend on these jobs to support themselves and their families, right? How do you weigh this? Again, we're seeing something, as we've seen, unfortunately, you can say fortunately or unfortunately, but many ethical questions are clearly black and white, but there's a lot of gray in ethics. I think we've seen that over the years. The ethical guidelines tell me to decide if I'm doing the right thing. How do you weigh that? Anyone want to suggest how do you weigh the ethics of not buying from a place where the workers aren't being treated well versus if we stop buying from those places, a lot of people will be out of a job? How do we weigh those two things? So let's take a look at what he says.
Not only
He's,
that, but
okay.
in addition to
I
that,
can't hear you. Put your volume up.
can you hear me now?
No, actually, no.
No, okay, I'll call.
I think your microphone is not.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's much better. Go ahead, please.
Hold on.
Miss Arias, hello.
I'll call back. I'll get back on.
I got it. We hear you now.
My hearing aids.
He's not talking to us.
I can't hear you now. I can't hear you.
President council meeting downstairs in the theater.
It's not. It's the audio is not coming through.
No, no, he's on.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I know.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
So, yeah.
In addition to that, if the cost of the item that I'm buying will go up if the people in those sweatshops stop working.
That's correct. Will the cost go up because other people will be hired who will be paid better? Or are there other factors as well? That's the question. Should we pay more so that we can be ethical consumers because we're concerned about the wages of those who create the clothing? On the other hand, are we concerned that those who are in those low-paying jobs will then be totally out of work? It's a weighing of ethical issues. Let's see what he says. Okay. Okay. These days, many corporations have adopted policies addressing human rights and set standards, though monitoring remains uneven and abuses persist. For example, Walmart. I'll be honest, I've been in, I think, Walmart twice in my life. I'm not a Walmart shopper, but many people throughout the United States go to Walmart, right? It's a major retailer, right? Detailed supplier standards. Target has a business partner code of conduct. Target I've been to many times. Burberry's, I can't say I buy Burberry's. Human rights policy requires all its business associates to comply with the various international conventions concerning working conditions. That's very nice, but I'm not sorry, can't afford Burberry's, Whether these commitments are honored is another matter, but once companies make such pledges, they at least risk public exposure if they fail. Okay, so you can check this. Consumers can hold companies accountable. Of course, one shopping cart is not going to move the needle, but it can matter as part of an organized effort. So there are some groups in Britain, ethical consumer. Okay, still it's complicated. Exploitation occurs everywhere, not just abroad. Even if you buy clothing manufactured in the United States, how do you still don't know what's going on? Millions of U.S. workers earn poverty wages. In 2023, the UN Special Rapporteur report, I have no idea who that is, on extreme poverty and human rights, questions whether Amazon, DoorDash, and Walmart were contributing to in-work poverty, i.e., people who work regular hours and still can't afford food, clothing, and shelter. So the moral problem isn't confined to the global South, it's in American warehouses too. That whilst abstaining spares us complicity, it can also deprive others of their livelihood. Bangladesh's ready-made garment industry has been plagued by poor conditions, yet it also helped to cut extreme poverty in that country sharply. Workers often take these jobs not because they're good, but because they are better than the alternatives. That doesn't mean they aren't exploited. Governments often suppress unions, tilt the rules against labor, leaving workers choosing the least bad option. All I have to do is mention Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, which we're all aware was a terrible tragedy in New York City. Actually, the building is still standing in Greenwich Village. It has now some plaques on it to remind us that there were sweatshops going on in the middle of New York City. So the challenge is to balance opposition to exploitation with the recognition that these industries have also been engines of survival and growth. Individual consumer choices, when tied into coordinated campaigns, can help push companies towards higher standards without losing sight of the uncomfortable truth. Clean hands here should not mean empty hands else. What do you think about his conclusion? Clean hands here should not mean empty hands elsewhere. Any comment on that conclusion? It's not an easy one, right? It's not an easy one how to figure out. So let's leave that there. We're going to go deeper into some of these issues as we go along. So after that, we did very briefly look at some issues and some of the matters, but I did turn to this. Let me get this stuff. Okay. This was I find this fascinating that the issue came up in a teshuva, a rabbinic discussion. Hopefully I can get this to one page. No, it's not doing that. All right. Trying to get it so everyone can see it, and it's large enough we can see it. Okay. All right. Can everyone see that? Is that large enough? Okay. Here was a question raised in the 19th century, okay, where Baghdad, as you may know, Baghdad was one of a major center of Jewish life, very large Jewish community, lots of communal work, schools, and so on. And this was we don't have to go into who was who, but here's a question. Here's a merchant who asks a very simple question. Okay. 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 Someone who married into the Sassoon family. Some of you've probably heard of Sassoon, right? That's a very famous, wealthy trading commercial enterprise in the Far East, a Sephardic family, and is anonymously called Ruvain. So Ruvain asks a question. Now, we did start taking a look at this last time, but I have to tell you, it was very complicated. Okay. Should he continue to buy peppercorns through a non-Jewish broker when the broker's non-Jewish partner in Malabar pays bribes to the weighers of the peppercorns? Okay. The international trade in peppercorns was very competitive. Native and colonial powers vied for control. Remember, we're talking about the time before refrigeration. And spice trade was even more important then than it is today. By the way, it's a whole other question we can raise, the ethics of refrigeration. I just read a book about it. Maybe we'll bring that up sometime, but for another time. Okay. Whether a person removed from a misdeed by a number of intermediaries still bears responsibility. It's our same question. Okay, I know Macy's pays its employees decently, so I'm not too worried about the people who work for Macy's, right? But let's go up the supply chain. How far up do I go And what if I'm not even 100% sure, but I kind of think something's going wrong along the supply chain? Am I contributing to unethical actions? Now we'll take a look at the beginning of this. We're going to go back and forth between the text and Ed, let me ask you a question. I don't suppose that there's any way I can share two documents.
Can
I
I
don't
make a
know.
comment?
Ed, is there any way I can share two documents?
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay. Let's leave it at that. We'll go back and forth. We'll start reading it, and then I made it. It's a little complicated. I almost felt like I was back in the seminary trying to figure out a Talmudic discussion when I literally had to take a piece of paper and write down which rabbi is saying what and who's objecting and who's saying what and what's the conclusion. And I had to die. So I went back to my old ways, and you'll see the diagram. Okay. Ruvain lives in Bombay. He has a non-Jewish broker who regularly brings him peppercorns from Malabar. Okay, so Bombay is the broker and Ruvain. The peppercorns are being grown far away. Okay. Ruvain covers his expenses, okay, and gives him a commission. The middleman has a non-Jewish partner in Malabar who purchases the peppercorns for him, okay? So the guy in Malabar is purchasing the peppercorns from the farmers. Then there's another middleman, and then there's Ruvain. Okay, clear so far. In the city of Malabar, 2 or 3 specific persons weigh the peppercorns. Okay. They are appointed to that function, and except for them, the seller cannot have anyone else weigh the peppercorns. So the guy up in Malabar has to buy the peppercorns from these official weighers. Okay. When this broker receives peppercorns from the city of Malabar and gives them to Ruvain, their weight is not constant. Sometimes it is more and sometimes it is less. I.e., when Ruvain says, I want 100 pounds of peppercorns, and the guy in Bombay says to his guy in Malabar, buy me 100 pounds of peppercorns, Ruvain winds up with 120 pounds of peppercorns or 80 pounds of peppercorns, never quite sure what he's going to get. But he knows that it's inconsistent, something's wrong at that weighing station up in Malabar, okay? However, Ruvain has no choice but to take them as their weight is defined in the document for Malabar. In other words, I know the weight is wrong. Somebody's doing something wrong in Malabar, but if I don't take them, I'm not going to get any peppercorns. So I have to take these peppercorns. He cannot demand the difference from them. Okay. Is that clear so far? Okay. Well, we're going to take just in case it isn't, we will clarify it right now. Well, the internet is wonderful. Okay. Peppercorns from Malabar. Oh, that's one word, isn't it? Okay. The supply chain. Somewhere in Malabar, there are farmers. They grow peppercorn trees. These are the peppercorns. They are then taken to a spice market. In Malabar, there is the official weigher of the peppercorns. Okay. This weigher of the peppercorns. Okay, everyone see this? Is this clear so far? All right. Weighed official in Malabar. There's bribery going on in this area. Okay. So, he's basically there are bribes. Somebody's thumb is on the scale. Okay. Okay. Sometimes sellers stay by weighers to keep them honest, i.e., okay, so sometimes somebody's watching over the shoulder of this guy to see that these scales are honest. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And there's bribery going on. And if they don't get bribed, whoa, you think they have their thumb on the scale? Don't give them a bribe. They've got their own hand on the scale. So it's really off. Okay. Now, this is the non-Jewish merchant who buys it from him. He's in Bombay, and he's going to sell it to Ruvain. By the way, why are the peppercorns so important? Well, that's why the peppercorns are so important. Right? Okay. So have we got the supply chain clear? Farmers, peppercorn merchant, unethical weighing. Guy in Bombay buys it from him and gives it to Ruvain. Up here, there's clearly unethical things going on. Sometimes worse, sometimes better, but that's what's going on. Okay. Any questions about the supply chain so far? Yes, Rini.
Okay, so if the weighers are being bribed, are they being bribed to weigh less to benefit if it comes out less, then they're benefiting the middleman. If it comes out more, they're benefiting the farmers. Is that right?
Yeah, the impression we get is that this guy, right, who that there are that these scales are not honest.
Okay.
So he bribes the weighers to be sure that if it's not honest, at least it's in his favor.
Okay.
He wants to bribe the scales in his favor. If he doesn't bribe them, it's going to be much worse. Now, sometimes you might get somebody who can stand there and be sure it's right, but you're never sure.
Okay.
Remember, this is they didn't have cell phones, right? They couldn't call out the guy and say, "Hey, you know what's going on," and you know, it's sad to say, in some economies, bribes were the standard, right? That people understood. Bribery happens. I mean, heaven forbid people should pay extra money, expect favors, right?
So who benefits then? If the
Who benefits?
the middleman bribes him, and so he bribes him to make believe it's more, and then he sells it to Ruvain for what the full price would be for the full weight, and he makes extra money.
He makes the commission. He works on commission.
Okay,
it's in his favor, right? To bribe, or he has to bribe, but no, ultimately, both he, right up here, not them, the farmers, this guy is making money, this guy is making money, and Ruvain has no choice.
Okay.
Okay, so there's unethical behavior. Now, is it sometimes somebody's watching? Yeah, sometimes they are. But if you don't pay the bribes, you're not going to get the peppercorns. So you got to get the peppercorns. And as I said, that's why you got to get the peppercorns. So there's a lot of unethical behavior going on. Now, we'll go back to the teshuvah, but this is the question. Now, here's Ruvain, an honest guy. He feels that he is, well, what would be, tell me, what do you think Ruvain's concerns might be?
He's getting chipped. He's not getting the full weight, and he's paying the full price.
Yes, but okay, we'll see in the teshuvah, Ruvain has some other concerns as well. In other words, there's the one concern, which is, I'm getting gypped, right? There's bribery going on. Heaven forbid things should be transactional. On the other hand, well, he's a real honest guy. As we will see, he has other concerns. Okay, so there's our supply chain. All right, so let's now go back. We may come back to this just to keep things clear, but let's go back to the teshuvah. Okay, whoops, I hit the wrong button. 1 second. What happened here? Uh-oh. I've lost. Oh, there you are. Okay, I lost that for a second because I wanted to do is no, that's not what I want to do. You would think by this point I would know what I was doing with this. Don't make any assumptions. Okay, here we go. There we go. Okay, well, we are back to the teshuvah. Everybody can see that. Is it big enough? Is it clear enough? Okay. All right. Reuven has no choice but to take them as their weight is defined in the document. He cannot demand the difference from them. This is Reuven's practice, as been doing for many years. In other words, Ruvain cannot say, "Hey, buddy, this is I'm getting gypped here. You know, I'm paying for 10 pounds and you're only giving me 80 pounds. Sorry, it's the way the world works, right? Okay. However, now Ruvain has heard that when the non-Jew in Malabar purchases the peppercorns, he gives a bribe to those who weigh them. When they weigh a larger amount, then they write it out as less, so that the buyer will profit, right? So that guy on the left, remember the guy on the left, he's bribing the weighers. They steal from the seller and give to the buyer. Okay, so in other words, there's a bribe there. This is the practice of all buyers. When Reuben heard that is what is going on, he said to the broker, okay, his friend in Bombay, according to our laws, according to the Torah, this is forbidden. What's the problem? The problem is not that I'm getting gypped. The problem is that we're talking about theft. You're stealing, and I'm receiving the profits of theft. It's not that, so Ruvain isn't saying, I'm not making as much money as I could. Ruvain is saying it's a violation of Jewish law, of the Bible, of the Torah.
Well,
Okay. Yeah, the comment. Yeah.
what's the difference between a bribe and negotiating with somebody for a lower price?
Okay, that we assume when you buy a car, it used to be when you bought a car, you would negotiate the price, right? I mean, that's the way it went. Nowadays, I understand that those negotiations aren't as common. But negotiating a price is negotiating a price. But a bribe is now someone is literally taking money. Money is changing hands physically. Money is or an account in order to promote the dishonest behavior. Now, this is not negotiating whether 1 pound or 80 pounds. This is saying it's 80 pounds, but you say, I'm sorry, it's 80 pounds. You say it's 1 pound, and here's the money I'm bribing, I'm giving you money to say that, right? That's the difference than saying, I want to buy peppercorns. Well, I give you 100. I know I want to buy 80. Okay, I'll give you 80. That's negotiation. But to say, here's a bag of peppercorns that weighs 100 pounds, but it only weighs 80 because you've been bribed, that's a different situation. Okay? All right. So Ruvain is disturbed because this is theft. The broker replied, we pay the weighers. Page. It's over. Not more, so that they will not weigh less. Only that they weigh honestly, so that you will not receive less. In other words, we're bribing them because we're afraid if we don't bribe them, you're really going to get messed up. You're really going to get messed up. However, if I do not give them bribes, they will weigh much less. Okay, it's 80. You gave me a bribe. Don't give me a bribe. I'm going to say this bag has 100 pounds of peppercorns, but it really only has 70. Give me a bribe, and we'll say and I'll put in 80, and you'll say it's 100. Okay, is that clear so far? Sometimes there are sellers who are very knowledgeable and violent. Violent. I've got my enforcers with me and suspect the weighers, and they stand by the scales. I'm just imagining the scene here. I got my friend who's going to give you a knuckle sandwich unless you honestly weigh my peppercorns, okay? When they weigh the peppercorns, and the weigher cannot steal anything from them. But that's only sometimes. And you never know when you're buying the peppercorns whether they were honestly weighed or whether there was a bribe. That information is not available to Ruvain. Okay? Okay. What is it to you? We are doing this for our own business. So in other words, Ruvain, what difference does it make to you? We do business. This is the way we do business, and that's it. Why does it bother Ruvain, right? Remember, we're talking about the supply chain. Why does it bother Ruvain, who's on the end of the supply chain, to what is happening to people, further down the chain, further up the chain, right? Why should Ruvain be worried about what's going on in the markets of Malabar? He's sitting there in Bombay with the guy who's producing peppercorns. So the guy in Bombay says to Ruvain, "Hey, it's in Malabar. What difference does it make? This is the way we do business. Give me a break." Okay. Ruvain replied that he still wanted the broker to write to the non-Jew in Malabar to stop giving money, bribes, to the waiters. The broker agreed to do so. So Ruvain says to the broker, "I want you to write a letter to the waiters to stop taking bribes." So the broker writes a letter to the waiters, "Stop taking bribes." But Ruvain does not believe the broker. You don't think I really wrote that letter? You want a certified receipt? I would also think that Ruvain might think, okay, he's going to write the letter, but yeah, a lot of good that's going to do, right? I mean, really. So there are two problems here. Is he going to really send the letter? And even if he sends the letter without the enforcer with the brass knuckles standing in front of the waiter, what difference is it going to make? Okay. It is likely that he will not so write his partner. In other words, he doesn't think the letter is going to be written at all. So Ruvain asks if he may continue to import peppercorns from his broker or not. For non-Jews, Noachites, that's the one way of talking about. Like before Noah, there were no Jews. So, before Abraham, there were no Jews. So sometimes in the literature, they talk about Noachites, okay. The term for non-Jews referring to the 7 commandments incumbent upon them, right? In order for people to be righteous, according to the Torah, to the later, Jews have 613 commandments. Non-Jews have 7 commandments in order to be called righteous. Are commanded against stealing. One of the 7 rules that non-Jews, according to the Torah, must follow is not steal. And Ruvain is the cause of their stealing from the sellers. If so, is it forbidden or permitted? Ruvain is not doing the stealing. He's even trying to stop the stealing. But as far as Ruvain is concerned, by buying the peppercorns in Bombay, he is encouraging non-Jews to break one of the rules of the Torah in Malabar up the chain. Okay, are we clear as what's going on so far? Okay, so that Ruvain isn't concerned, I'm losing money, right? He could have been concerned with the fact that, I'm going to go out of business and my wife and children are going to starve. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, how far up the supply chain am I responsible for something being done improperly by buying the peppercorns? By the way, he's not concerned about whether the farmers are getting a fair price. He's not concerned whether the farmers are hiring slaves who are treating the people who are actually harvesting the peppercorns are being paid fair wages, right? Those are issues which we'll see nowadays. But his concern is that there is corruption, there is the violation of a rule in the Torah up the chain. And I've tried, but I can't stop it. So should I just stop buying them? Okay. By the way, what do you think the answer to that question is? Should Ruvain buy the peppercorns? Any comment on that? How many of you think that the rabbis the rabbis are in Baghdad, 19th century. How many think the rabbis are going to say to Ruvain, stop buying the peppercorns? You think the rabbis are going to say, Ruvain, just buy the peppercorns? Why? Why would they say that the peppercorns are something that Ruvain can buy? What do you think might be some of their answers? What would be the concerns of the rabbis? What do you think? Rini?
Well, I'm thinking providing for his family. And if we think about today here, there isn't anything we purchase that we can really find out if it's ethically produced or people are well paid. Anything, even something religious like a siddur. We don't know up the chain, how it's produced or a refrigerator. It's not just clothing, it's anything. So I think we can go so far, and then maybe we have to be a little selfish. And we can, Ted and I got solar panels, so we're not polluting the environment as much. We're only one house on our street that did it, so we're not making a big impact in the environment, but it's a small impact. And so maybe the rabbis would say, if you can make a small impact and at least try to make something better, if that's the only supply of peppercorns and it affects your livelihood, maybe
Okay.
you have to buy it.
Right. And by the way, most solar panels are produced in China. They're beginning to be produced other places, but the vast majority are produced in China. Are we concerned about the working conditions of the Chinese workers? I don't know. Should we be? Can we be? Rini is saying, sometimes it goes when it's higher up on the supply chain, you just don't have any power over it. That's what you're saying. Okay,
That's right.
That's a possible answer. So Ruvain should buy the peppercorns, and we should all have crispy pot roast.
He has objected. He has made a step to try, and he could find another dealer from another place, but it's you saying that's the only place he can buy them from.
That's the only place that we're going to buy a peppercorn.
So he has to maybe compromise his principles in order to provide for his family. I don't know.
Okay, that's one possible answer. And anyone else before we take a look at now, we're going to take a look at, because these are, by the way, very well-known rabbis who are answering this question. In there in Baghdad, Iraqi Jewish community, very well established. And so they want to know, should Ruvain buy the peppercorn? So let's see what they say. Okay. The first question, which he's going to start talking about, you'll notice section A, putting a stumbling block in the way. Rabbi Somei considers three principles, right? In other words, he's going to do it through principles of Jewish law. He starts by analyzing whether the prohibition, do not put a stumbling block before the blind. By the way, the Torah says, do not put a stumbling block before the blind, right? And all the commentaries say, huh? You have to tell people not to trip a blind person? Come on, what's going on here? So as you will see, there are, of course, the interpretations of the Torah and the Talmud, they go beyond it, right? Okay. We have a prohibition that forbids Ruvain to do this. The prohibition of do not put a stumbling block before the blind, just as it says in that. Now he's going to quote from the Talmud. What's going on? He says, from where is it derived that the person may not extend a cup of wine to a Nazirite who is prohibited from drinking wine? Imagine a person who is an alcoholic and is now not drinking. Do you ask them, hey, come, let's go have a drink, right? And that he may not extend a limb severed from a living animal, aver min hachai, you cut off the leg of an animal, then you roast it and eat it. To a Noachite, to a non-Jew who is prohibited from consuming a limb severed from a living animal. We are too, but here are two. What is he saying? Do not put a stumbling block before the blind doesn't just mean don't trip up the blind. It says don't create a situation where you are tempting someone to do something that is prohibited by the Torah, right? The verse, you shall not put a stumbling block before the blind. Okay, so, but here, if they did give it to him in either situation, he could take it himself, yet the one who hands it is guilty of placing a stumbling block before the blind, i.e. the alcoholic could go out and buy a cup of wine, or the non-Jew who himself or herself could take the limb off of the animal and eat it and commits a sin. But if you, as a Jew, are doing something that is encouraging or creating a situation where a person is likely to do something that he's prohibited from doing, you have placed a stumbling block before the blind, i.e., made it easier for that person to sin. Yeah, there's some other commentaries. That is the case with regard to all other prohibitions. In other words, you should not do something that encourages some. You shouldn't say to somebody who's keeping kosher, boy, come over to my house, we'll have cheeseburgers. They're really good. I'll take them off the grill, right? You shouldn't do these things. Okay. And if so, in our case, since Noachites, non-Jews, are commanded about theft, a Jew who asked him to bring peppercorns is causing the broker's partner, the guy up in Malabar, to steal, because it is known that this is the practice in Malabar, that the buyer is the one who bribes the weigher through the scale, and the Jew is the one violating, you shall not put a stumbling block before the blind, because it is, for him, the non-Jew is stealing, i.e., by buying the peppercorns, you are creating a situation where someone who is, yes, non-Jewish, but that non-Jewish person is going to be now in a situation where he's going to violate a rule of the Torah. Okay, is that clear? what the issue here? Do not put a stumbling block before the blind. All right, do not create a situation where you are encouraging someone to do something that they should not do. Particularly in this case, a rule from the Torah. So you buy the peppercorns up the chain, right? And there up the chain is that guy in Malabar bribing the weighers. Okay. At first glance, we can find leniency for Ruvain, because even if Ruvain did not ask his broker to bring peppercorns, there are otherwise many other brokers for that broker to bring peppercorns. I.e., okay, so Ruvain stops buying peppercorns. Well, does that mean the peppercorn industry is going to go kaflooey? No. There are plenty of people buying peppercorns. So here's that interesting question. Does one person's actions, which we might say you shouldn't do, have such an impact that that's going to change that behavior that we think is unethical in the supply chain? So now he's suggesting, one person, if you don't buy that dress made in Bangladesh, somebody else is. If so, Ruvain is not responsible, because if he doesn't ask him to bring peppercorns, there are other buyers, right? They will violate the prohibition. Ruvain is not responsible. In this case, the non-Jewish partner would bring peppercorns to other people and violate the prohibition. Not only his broker in Malabar, in Bombay, the broker in Bombay said, okay, Ruvain, you don't want to buy these peppercorns? I'll send them to Shimon, or somebody else. However, this leniency is not so clear-cut, because even if the non-Jewish partner violates the prohibition for other buyers, Ruvain increases his sin. Ruvain is now sinning, is a sinner. Take that very seriously, and causes him to steal again when he orders peppercorns repeatedly. In other words, now he is encouraging the guy up in Malabar who is continuing to bribe. If so, this leniency falls into the well and is invalid. So he says there might be a leniency because somebody else is going to buy the peppercorns, but he's really encouraging this. And he shouldn't be encouraging there's some okay. He shouldn't be encouraging this. So he said, yeah, I could give a leniency because if he stops buying the peppercorns, somebody else is going to buy the peppercorns. But Ruvain himself is really encouraging the theft. So I'm not going to say, okay, somebody else is going to buy the peppercorns. Okay, number 2. Rabbi Sommer considers the question of the chains of responsibility. If one person asks another person to make a purchase, and the second person asks the third person to make a purchase, and the third person is the one who commits a sin, should the first person be considered responsible? I.e., how far up the chain do we go? So he finds another example. Again, what is fascinating is that there are examples of these sorts of things from the Talmud, which is going to give some guidance in this case. A rabbi of the period of the Mishnah, 2nd century, that starts in the 2nd century of the Common Era. Okay, to about the 5th century. I'm sorry, 2nd century before the Common Era to about the 5th century of the Common Era. Taught Any of these items whose sale is prohibited to non-Jews because they could use it in idolatrous worship. Okay. There's certain stuff that non-Jews might use to worship idols. So you can't sell them these things because you're encouraging the person who buys it to do idolatry. And idolatry is also one of the things that non-Jews are prohibited from doing. One may sell to non-Jews a large package because they intend to sell it, not use it themselves. Oh, I have this statue here, and I'm going to sell it to a non-Jew. Now, the non-Jew may use it as an idol or not, but I know that the non-Jew who I sell it to, he's going to sell it to somebody else. And this other person he sells it to, now that person might use it as an idol. So can I sell it to the first person? But should we be concerned lest the non-Jew goes and sell it to others who will offer it as a sacrifice, i.e. in idolatrous worship? Abaye says, we are commanded to not place a stumbling block before the blind, but we are not commanded to not place a stumbling block before one who may then place a stumbling block before the blind. This is saying how far up the chain do we go? 1. You don't go to the second and third level of the supply chain. You need to be honest with the person you're immediately dealing with, but you're not responsible for what happens up the chain. This is so far. That's where we are at this point. Okay. The meaning of this text is that the non-Jew who bought directly from a Jew is the one who transgresses, right? But if this person goes to sell to another person, the person once removed does not transgress, i.e. the original seller. As for the second one who does, this one is once removed. The non-Jew then sells the prohibited item to another non-Jew who intends to use it. Oops, I didn't make a diagram for this. In idolatrous worship, we do not consider this transgression, i.e. again, the question of how far up the supply chain you go, the answer is 1. Just as Rashi explains. If so, in our case, Ruvain may order his broker to bring him peppercorns because he is not the broker who is committing the transgression, but rather he is commanding his partner who is in Malabar to buy the peppercorns, right? The guy in Malabar is buying the peppercorns, not the guy in Bombay who is the broker. It is his emissary who is in Malabar who is committing this transgression. We are not concerned because it is, you shall not place a stumbling block before the blind once removed. If so, Ruvain can order via the broker. You like that answer?
It's practical.
It's practical. Okay. Do you like it?
It's so hard to, it's so hard. I mean, there are certain stores I will not shop in because of their policies toward women, abortion, so on and so on and so on. But it's not, but if that store were ShopRite and there was only one supermarket where I lived, what would I do? And so I think this is a similar situation. He's kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. He has no alternative. If I don't like ShopRite, I can go to any other number of supermarkets, but this is not the case. So it's the way the rabbis are saying, I think the rabbis are saying, well, this is a situation, you can't control it, and you tried, and so you're not actually committing the bribe, you're just receiving what you paid for.
Well, that's a utilitarian argument, right? The rabbis and one can make that utilitarian argument, right? Think about the consequences. But the rabbis are really going beyond that, and they're not making just a utilitarian argument. They're making a legal argument. They're making a philosophical argument that is based upon the rule. There is a moral rule here, he's saying. Okay, the moral rule is that you don't take responsibility beyond one level of the supply chain. Now, yes, that does have pragmatic, there are conclusions, but it's interesting that they're talking about it in legal halakhic terms. In other words, I can make this ruling because it says so in the Talmud, not because it helps your business practices. Okay, why are they doing this? Because they're rabbis and they have to say, okay, we're making decisions that have a real basis. Third part, whether the prohibition against aiding those who are committing a sin. Okay, yet there is a third principle. That is the prohibition of aiding someone who are committing a sin. If the broker is worried that if he does not bribe the weighers of the peppercorns, it will weigh us, and Ruvain will suffer a loss. Then Ruvain may no longer buy peppercorns from him, and this will be the end of the non-Jew's livelihood. Now he's adding that question. Okay, we're not just talking philosophically, we're not just talking about text, we're talking about people making a living. So now he has a concern about people making a living. If so, this is not a matter of doubt, but rather it is certain that the broker who did not write to his partner as Reuben ordered. In other words, Reuven says to the broker, you got to write this letter and stop this bribery. But if the broker does that, he's going to lose business. And even if there is support to say that he did indeed write so to his partner, it is more likely that he did not. Even if he didn't write to his partner, there's a question of livelihood. Therefore, Ruvain is forbidden to continue to order via his broker. He can't, even with this question of whether or not he's going to lose his livelihood, we still are saying he's aiding those who commit sins. Okay, not done yet. May not finish today. The sellers watch the weighers. Rabbi Smike discusses whether selling something that might be sold to another for a sinful act. In other words, here's this question. Sometimes there aren't any bribes, but we don't know. He notes that while doing so is aiding a non-Jew to sin is completely prohibited, allowing one to indirectly aid a non-Jew to commit a sin is ethically problematic. Right? This question of indirect, how far down the chain? How can a clear distinction, next page, between direct and indirect aid be made? I.e., again, how far down the chain? Ultimately, he concludes that Ruvain is not responsible for what his broker's partner might do, the guy in Malabar. Okay, that Ruvain is not responsible for what the guy in Malabar is doing. Since suspicious sellers do sometimes keep an eagle eye on the weighers to stop from lying about the weight of the peppercorns, and therefore no offense might be committed. I.e., there is a possibility that somebody's watching. And if somebody is watching, there's no sin. If there's no sin, buy the peppercorns, right? Okay, try to finish this. That's selling. Okay. We can give permission. Some rabbinic authorities hold that selling incense is permitted, even if the purchaser might use it for idolatrous worship. Buy incense, I just like the smell. No, I buy incense because I'm going to burn it in front of an idol. Okay. Because it is possible that the non-Jew will sell it to another non-Jew and so on. But in the case of worn-out books that are suitable for prayer in houses of idolatrous worship, there's no doubt that the non-Jew will give them or sell them. In other words, now we're talking about doubt. We're not 100% sure what's going to happen. It's possible that somebody will have an eagle eye over those weighers. Okay. But if the violation is not certain, as in such case, frankincense, which was, again, sometimes used for idolatrous worship and sometimes not. Okay. Okay. It is possible that he owns the frankincense for medicine. In other words, can you sell somebody frankincense? Well, I'm going to use it for medicine. No, I'm going to use it to worship an idol. It's questionable. Sell it. In our case, it's very much in the realm of possibility that the non-Jews who sell the peppercorns do not believe those weighing them, and they themselves stand next to them, so as to not. In other words, somebody's watching. Here, the principle of aiding those who commit sin does not apply, because it is possible that they will not commit the sin. Now, here's the question of doubt. If so, Ruvain may order his non-Jewish broker to import peppercorns for him because, as we have analyzed, from all these considerations, there is no cause for concern, because you can't be sure.
This is typical Talmud, right? One side says one thing, one side says the other thing, then the third one has another opinion. and then you don't know where to go anyway.
Well, no, they are making a decision. They are saying there are several, look, they said there are several considerations, and some of those considerations would say to Ruvain, don't buy the peppercorns, right?
Right.
Because
But
he's
then
helping
other
somebody
ones,
sin. But wait a second, there's a doubt. We can't be sure that
right,
he is doing that. So now they're adding this new issue and saying, well, because there's doubt, buy the peppercorns. Not because we think it's right, not because of somebody's livelihood, not because you may be aiding someone's sin, but we're really not sure. Rabbi Somach sent his answers to his nephew, but he also asked somebody else to answer. Okay. And this other rabbi said, it is obvious that an illegality is being committed when Ruvain sees that he has received more peppercorns than he paid for, yet it is probably not a case of theft, but rather swindling. Okay, since the scale is true and only the weighers are speaking deceitfully. So now again, as Rini is pointing out, there's a finer line the rabbi is drawing here. Well, the weighers are not weighing accurately. Is this theft or some type of, swindling? Everything that is written above applies to an outright theft or short weighing in which the scales has false weight. But here they weigh with a scale they call a kaban, in which there is no mendacity. Rather, it is the weigher who deceives the owner of the peppercorns by intentionally reading the sign on the scale incorrectly. That is, the scale weighs 10 measures, but the weigher says the weight is 8 measures. The weigher is the one, not Ruvain, who is the one who misleads. How far up the chain are we going? Ruvain is not committing a sin, the weigher is. Okay? Rabbi Joseph Chaim goes on to urge Ruvain to find out more about the specifics of the transaction, assuming he can, right? I'm going to send a newspaper reporter up to Malabar, and he's going to videotape and put on YouTube what happens when they weigh the peppercorns. That may or may not be possible, all right? It is striking that both rabbis seek to find a leniency in halacha in order to permit Ruvain to continue doing business by ordering peppercorns from Malabar, probably because, notice what Rabbi Barmash is saying, probably because Ruvain is not the one committing the sin, as opposed, is it because he's not committing the sin, or is it because we're not sure if a sin is being committed? But, and you can see that they are in favor of, now maybe they're in favor of Ruvain continuing to buy the peppercorns because they don't want to ruin Ruvain's occupation and his ability to earn money. They don't say that. We don't know. But notice how Rabbi Barmash sees it. Probably because Ruvain is not the one committing the sin. Comments or questions on that before we end? So the question, how far up the chain do you go? How far? Oops, let me get this big. I just messed up. I keep hitting the wrong buttons here. Well, I'll just leave it that way. The question here, how far up the chain do you go? And you can see that what we have here is the question being answered not very far, right? Not very far. Ruvain can buy the peppercorns. Why? Because we're not sure about what's happening up the chain, right? And since he himself is not committing the sin. We'll take a look at that and take a look at some other principles next time. All right, any comments or questions before we end? Are we clear as to what was happening with the peppercorns? Did my little diagram help you understand where things are going? So we see that going up the chain here in this case is not very far. Let me see. Yes, let me see. Okay, I just did that. All right. Any comments, questions before we meet next time? Let me just summarize. He's not going very far up. there's some doubt as to exactly what is happening. You wonder if the case, they could say there's no question, 100% everything is wrong, is being bribed. They may have answered differently, although I'm not so sure. And what happens when there's doubt is what's going on and they were a little bit worried about the livelihood. Okay.
So, Rabbi,
Yes.
question. So based on that, you have these stores that you mentioned before that have, signed on to, fair trade type practices. Is that as far up the chain as we need to go, just to them?
Well, that's a good question. We'll take a look. That's a very good question. We'll take a look at that. And not only that, how about the worst question? Do you trust them? Ed, when you see one, do you trust it?
Well, you have to.
Yeah, well,
You have no way of knowing.
well, does Ruvain have any way of being sure, even if his broker in Bombay sends a letter to Malabar and says to the guy in Malabar, get somebody to watch the weighing when you're buying peppercorns for Ruvain, because Ruvain wants to be sure that there's no hanky-panky and going on.
But
And
he's not required to do that as long as the one as long as that first person is giving him telling him he has to trust them.
So is that the same as when you see one of these seals or one of these proclamations that this garment or this whatever product has been made fairly? Do you trust it? That's a question, right?
If you don't trust it, you're not buying anything anywhere anytime.
another practical problem as well. Exactly. This is not a simple issue. There's not a simple issue, but I hope you enjoyed. I certainly did. Seeing what happened in the 19th century with the peppercorns, which is some very interesting parallels to what we're thinking about right now, and we'll continue in this next week. Okay, everybody. Have a nice week, and we'll see you